special events team at Encore Learning, and I'd like to introduce Dan Sherman. Excuse me. Dan has been with us many times. Dan has been with us many times as a course instructor and through special events. And I know I was first introduced to Dan during the Hamilton Man and the musical, and I've heard him many, many times, as we all have. He's terrific. He jumps into these subjects in depth, and today he's jumping into J. Robert Oppenheimer, talking about Oppenheimer the man, and also alluding to the movie. So Dan is an economist by background, but he has many, many avocations, and we are the proud recipients of some of his knowledge. So Dan?
Okay. Well, I'm going to share my screen and share sound. And sorry, we'll get there. I hope everything is good now. I'm going to assume yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we were just hearing, those who came a little bit early, were hearing an absolutely wonderful piece of music. One of those extraordinary string quartets Beethoven wrote in his last years. He's completely deaf, and he writes just beautiful, beautiful music. That's a quartet C-sharp minor. It was Opus 131, Beethoven's favorite piece of music that he wrote, and also a favorite of J. Robert Oppenheimer. So it was played at Oppenheimer's funeral. Why do we want to talk about J. Robert Oppenheimer potentially? Well, there's a number of reasons. If we are interested in the history of American physics, how Americans developed its reputation, its expertise in physics, we'd be very interested in Oppenheimer, what he did in 1930. He's one of the great teachers of physics early on, when America really didn't have a strong physics tradition. Physics was pretty much European. We'll talk about that. But I think the reason, Oppenheimer is known is he had an absolutely crucial role in developing the first nuclear weapons, the atomic bomb of 1945. And he was just a really well-known, very influential figure in what would our nuclear weapons policy be. Then that his beliefs, those policies, are still very, very much with us today. And I think that adds a lot of relevance to Oppenheimer. I think many of you know a movie was made this past summer by, showed this summer, made by Christopher Nolan. And Nolan made it in part because he got interested in Oppenheimer, was talking to his teenage children about potentially making a movie. And they basically said, do we still have nuclear weapons? Are there anything we should be concerned about? Well, they should be. I think that makes it into the movie too. I love to say, those who have taken a class from me, biography is a great way to learn about a subject. I think particularly science. Most of us aren't scientists. The works of Albert Einstein might be impenetrable when we see the mathematics, or the works of Beethoven might be impenetrable if you're not a musician, if you don't read music. But a good biographer is going to tell you about the work, tell you about the person, put them in context of the time. I think a biography of Oppenheimer, it's one thing that got me interested in science way back when, atomic bomb policy, when I was reading back as a kid in the 1960s. Oppenheimer, there's another period of history, obviously plays very importantly in his life. He had controversial relations with individuals who were communists. So this whole notion, if you saw my talk on Charlie Chaplin as an example, or Hollywood in the 1950s, but the 40s, this whole period, 1930s, 40s, 50s, individuals' involvements with communism, how did that affect their careers? And it certainly affected Oppenheimer. I think most of us know he lost his security clearance here. He had a leadership role, absolutely, the most important. He was the face, if you will, of the atomic bomb, what most people would think of. People sought his advice at all levels, but his earlier past and problems with his character led to the loss of his security clearance here. And all things aside, he's just a really interesting character. And I'll try to highlight some of that. So here we are from the movie, really fine portrayal of Robert Oppenheimer, his wife, played by Emily Blunt. And somebody mentioned earlier among our panelists, related to General Leslie Groves, who built the Pentagon, played by Matt Damon, played quite seriously in the movie. Oftentimes we think of General Groves as something of a buffoon. the way he's portrayed. Robert Oppenheimer is going to be born in 1904. His family at this point is a very wealthy family. And his father, Julius, had come from Germany. He had relatives in the United States in the clothing business. He got involved, made a great deal of money. Oppenheimer grew up in wealth. The father loved art and music. The Oppenheimer family, which we'll talk about, grew up. They had a floor of an apartment building on Riverside Drive, up by Columbia. His mother was very artistic. She had studied in Paris. She taught at Barnard College. The family loved art. They loved music. They actually had some Van Goghs on the wall when the Oppenheimers needed some money. Robert, or really his brother, they sold one of the Van Goghs here. Here's Robert with his mother. Robert was known, just like Cillian Murphy, who played him in the movie, for his blue eyes. And you have a sense of, how they carried in his life here. So Robert Oppenheimer as a child was frail. He loved minerals. He was a very, very bright kid. This may not surprise you. So bright that he was off collecting minerals when he could. And he started writing to the New York Mineralogical Society, and he was asked, would you like to come and speak to one of our meetings? So what the people who put together the meeting were quite surprised when this person who had been writing back and forth about some of the things that he had been finding, the types of minerals and his discussion of them, was a 10-year-old. But he loved building blocks and he loved sailing. That's going to be a big part of his life. He's not terribly athletic, but he loves to sail, and that's going to carry into his life, including his latter years here. He shows an interest in science, not just the minerals, but he's good at math. He's very good at languages. He's fluent in French and German as he's growing up here. He attends the ethical culture school, and he excels. He's a valedictorian here. He has a brother, Frank, who plays well in the Robert Oppenheimer story, plays a major role. A younger brother, about 8 years, who Frank will also go into physics. Robert Oppenheimer, after high school, he goes off to Europe looking for minerals, traveling. Europe was a friend. He had relatives in Germany. And one thing he does, one rock he's quite interested in, he picks up some in Germany as he's traveling around uranium here. After high school, really his last year, he goes down to New Mexico with one of his teachers who just likes to play, his teachers like it, teacher likes it. He goes down there and just loves it. He loves camping out. He loves getting onto a horse, going up into the mountains, roughing it. This boy who, not many 16-year-olds have a 30-foot sailing boat. He does, but he likes to get out there, enjoy himself. And this includes the area of Los Alamos. So he goes off to Harvard. He's not sure what he's going to major in, but he's chosen chemistry. He's taking, the full contingent of chemistry courses, but then he's packing it in with courses in poetry, religion, philosophy, etc. And he gets into physics relatively late. His college career is not that long. He graduates Harvard in 3 years, but somewhere in the middle of all that, he decides he wants to be a physics major, switches over, and he would say he was haphazard. He's absolutely brilliant. He's reading the books and such, but in part because his training is rather brief, he's not really taking the standard curriculum. He basically jumps into a graduate curriculum based on what he's been doing. So he graduates Harvard 3 years. He goes off to another Cambridge, to the United Kingdom. We see a little bit of this move in the movie. And Cambridge, England, the UK, is famous for its experimental physics. People like Ernest Rutherford, J.J. Thomson, and discoverer of the electron, but people who are building things, etc., not scribbling at blackboards so much. It's not what for Robert Oppenheimer. His brother does very well here. But he is getting interested in theoretical physics. He thinks that's much more interesting. And that's not really what Cambridge is about. There's really not a lot of theoretical physics in the United States. Where do we have theoretical physicists? Well, you have Niels Bohr in Copenhagen, and you have many, many people in Germany. Göttingen. I didn't put the umlauts here. Excuse me here. So he goes off to Germany, to Göttingen, great university, for his doctorate. And who does he meet there? The faculty include James Franck, or well, some of them were studying there. James Frank Otto Hahn, Ernst Jordan, Paul Dirac, John von Neumann, and his advisor, Max Born. Each of these individuals will win a Nobel Prize, great physicists of the 19th century, except John von Neumann, who's a mathematician who works in every field and is probably one of the most brilliant people who ever lived and will have a key role in developing nuclear weapons here. One person he's going to meet, Werner Heisenberg, who's developing the uncertainty principle, and of course is well known in World War II for heading up the German effort to build the bomb, possibly delaying it here. So America at that time, anyways, weak in physics. And here's Robert Oppenheimer, rather big hair. I had that hair when I was that age here. And he's a brilliant, brilliant student. He's publishing, first-rate papers in German, which he's fluent, and he will write 13 published papers, write and publish 13 papers in 2 years on quantum mechanics, which is relatively new. Remember, quantum mechanics is being developed in the 20s. And he's known for being impatient, sometimes tactless, though he could be charming. I think an example of his tactlessness, he's the smartest person in the room. Most people would agree with that. And he's in a room with some pretty smart people there. One person, I couldn't believe he did this, but his graduate advisor, Max Born, will win a Nobel Prize, gives Oppenheimer a paper that he's written and says, Robert, read through this, check it through carefully. And Born was famous for making mathematical mistakes. So Oppenheimer rather loudly gave it back to him, said, it's a great paper, and said, did you actually do the math? There are no mistakes in it. You shouldn't say that to your graduate advisor. I'm surprised. So anyway, Oppenheimer, this mix of absolute charm, but then, being smarter than other people, pushing people, can sometimes be good in teaching, can sometimes be good in developing atomic bomb work, isn't always necessarily good when you're dealing with people more powerful than yourself. So he comes back to the United States, and he spends time in New Mexico. And he says, in the 1920s, I'd love to somehow be able to combine physics in New Mexico. Spoiler alert, he will do that. So his teaching, and I'm kind of racing here because there's a lot of stuff. He has a lot of job offers. He ends up dividing his time. He basically has 2 contracts between Caltech, which is pretty well established in physics at that point, as Robert Millikan, those physicists in physics will know him, and to Berkeley, with the idea he's going to build a school of theoretical physics there. And again, America doesn't really have theoretical physics, much of a program here. So Frank is now coming into age, and school is going to work with him. And the brothers, convinced, they're traveling off to New Mexico, and they actually buy a cabin or have a cabin in New Mexico that they'll buy. He's traveling during this time before he settles down going back to Germany, spends time in the Netherlands. In the movie, you'll see the scene where people are a bit surprised. He's been in the Netherlands for 6 weeks. He's learned Dutch in that time to give a lecture. Goes off to Zurich, great center for physics, meets Wolfgang Pauli. So Berkeley, there's not much of a program. He develops it up. But one thing Berkeley has going for it is Ernest Lawrence is there. And Lawrence is very weak on theory because he's a great experimental physicist. He, develops the cyclotron. With adaptation, that helps put American physics on the map. People in Europe would say, hey, they're developing some great things over there. The cyclotron, there's theory to go with it. That will actually have a key role in the atomic bomb too. But Oppenheimer is seen as an excellent teacher. He's incredibly demanding, incredibly fast. He's one of these writing with one hand, erasing with the next sort. And, people would start coming to Berkeley to study physics. And, he gets to know people around the United States. That's going to be very important for the atomic bomb. Students will come and they'll take his physics course once, twice, 3 times. Somebody was told 4 times is too much. But he'll have a number of students who will go off and do things in physics. He has a lot of friends in Berkeley, socially, maybe too many, because Berkeley is a hotbed of leftist activity. if you will. And, the Communist Party is active in and around Berkeley here. Oppenheimer's physics, well, he's quite productive. He's still churning things out. He does a lot of work with the students here. They get published here. And my understanding of Oppenheimer's work, there's a line in the movie, how come you don't have a Nobel Prize? Well, he didn't have a Nobel Prize, probably wasn't going to get one because he would go from project to a project. He would do very good work, but it never was quite the cutting edge that other physicists would have here. One paper he wrote, it is related to quantum physics. You don't think of it from the title, but it is when you think of it. It's called On Continued Gravitational Contraction. And you'll see this in the movie. What happens when you have a star that loses its fuel, collapses, keeps on going to the point it becomes a neutron star, or even beyond, becomes a black hole. Oppenheimer is writing about black holes, 1939. The paper did not get a lot of attention. Oppenheimer never came back to the topic, really didn't want to discuss it 30 years later, almost 30 years later, when people were beginning to discuss it. Part of the reason it didn't get attention is the paper came out the very day that Germany invaded Poland here. So anyway, this idea of a star collapsing to a point that light cannot escape its gravity. It's in a paper by Robert Oppenheimer and a student. So his great gift, what he could do, why he could work on different projects here, the skill that with many students doing different things, why he worked so well in the Manhattan Project, he could very, very quickly understand a problem, hold a lot of information in his head, and oftentimes see a solution. So that is a good gift. So what he did, it worked well academia, but it works well in war work. So life in Berkeley, here we are, 1930s, lots of friends. He's not just hanging out with the physics department. He has a friend who's a professor of Sanskrit. Well, he learns Sanskrit. And he famously is interested in the Hindu texts here. He doesn't practice his Judaism, but he's quite interested in the writings, Hindu writings, and famously, supposedly, I have my question. He thought of some phrases from the sacred texts when the atomic bomb exploded here. Well, per the politics, the interests of the time, this is the Depression. He has lots and lots of friends interested in politics, social issues, trying to get teachers unionized, helping African Americans get into the swimming pools. They were excluded, helping the loyalists in Spain who were in a war with the communists there too. But a lot of his friends are members of the Communist Party too here. And Oppenheimer is not really interested in communism per se, but he's interested in the different causes that they're involved with, the local communists. And again, some social issues, unionism, kids in the pool, civil rights, and helping Spanish loyalists fight fascists, also helping people escape Germany. He had plenty of relatives there too. He was trying to help. I'm going to hide the controls here, hopefully not lose them. So good. So one person he meets, you'll remember her in the movie, Jean Tatlock. She's the daughter of a professor of English literature, a Chaucer scholar. Oppenheimer, unlike perhaps many physicists, knows Chaucer quite well, and he has a relationship with her in the 1930s. On and off, they're engaged one minute, they're not the other. And she, I think rather unfortunately, knows his interest and opens the door to the Communist Party. And he does not become a member of the party. His brother, however, does. The wife become party members. They're going to have trouble for sure in the 1940s, 50s. And Jean Tatlock, after they separate, goes off, studies medicine. And even after Robert Oppenheimer was chosen to direct the atomic bomb project, it was really stupid, a very brilliant man. That's done in late 1942, 43. He goes off, he meets Jean Tatlock, who he knows is a communist. He knows he's going to be director of Los Alamos. They spend the night together. And interestingly enough, she's found dead a few weeks later, head in a bathtub, apparent suicide. people say apparent. Some people wonder if something suspicious is going on. I think you see a little bit of that in the movie. I have to go look at my copy. I've read somewhere. You see a bit of a hand, at the edge of the screen after she's drowned. One person he meets, Haken Chevalier, and he's a professor of French literature and very close to Oppenheimer, too close, I would say. Even when his friendship is causing Oppenheimer problem, Oppenheimer maintains contact with him. Again, not the best thing to do. So just trying to get my own picture to pop up here. If I could be spotlighted, please. Well, Chevalier becomes famous in the Oppenheimer story because in 1943, Oppenheimer is going off to Los Alamos, and he's hosting one of his cocktail parties, infamous or famous, I should say. Lots of martinis. I'd enjoy them. And Chevalier comes into the kitchen and said, Robert, if there's any information you would like to convey to Moscow about anything I know somebody who could help get you information. Remember, Moscow, Russia at this point is an ally of the Soviet Union. And Oppenheimer says, feigns or shows shock. And he said, oh, but that would be treason to, go outside the channels. And depending on what you read, Chevalier says, oh, of course. Well, where this really comes to bite Oppenheimer, seemingly someone wanted information. He should have reported it. He didn't. It took him months to do it. And then he told a false story where he didn't identify Chevalier. Possibly one of the people he was trying to protect along the line was his brother. Oppenheimer, people knew that he lied, and at various points along the story, including the end of his career here. His involvement in Communist Party is murky. And what he realizes is, you'll see in the movie, if I'm going to be doing war work, I just need to get away from all of this. This is going to cause a problem. But at that point, the trap was set in that the FBI was already interested in him, trailing him. They would, and you see some of that in the movie, write down license plates, wiretapping his phone, etc. Well, beginning of the war work. Okay, so here we are, and I've said this, we were having a little discussion before the talk. What is really surprising to me about the Manhattan Project was how quickly things happened. Nuclear fission, remember, Hiroshima, we're talking the end of World War II, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, test of the first atomic bomb in July 1945. Fission was not discovered, and the notion that you could split an atom and get quite a bit of energy out of it was not even discovered until 1938. And by 1939, people realized, less than 6 years until the bomb was actually made and dropped, that uranium was something that could be fissioned and it could potentially produce a weapon. People thought there might be nuclear energy, but just didn't think it was feasible. So those, group of physicists, Hungarian physicists, including Edward Teller, who had escaped Hungary, getting away from Hitler, wanted to warn President Roosevelt, but figured no one is going to read a letter that they write. So they went to the most famous physicist in America, Albert Einstein, who they essentially script a letter for Einstein that he sends along in August 1939. Almost nothing happens for a year and a half until the British, who are really more on the ball than Americans, they're under attack, being bombed, but they're working on the physics of the bomb, the theoretical physics, and some of the experimental physics too. And they come to the conclusion, it actually is possible to make a bomb, and it can be done with a relatively modest amount of uranium, not tons and tons, but something that, could be made and potentially delivered on a ship or an airplane. So Berkeley, the way the so-called Manhattan Project is organized at this point, it's really a group of universities. Chicago is one, Columbia is another, Berkeley is another. Berkeley's working more on the theoretical side. And Oppenheimer becomes the head of that group. And he gets a strange title, Coordinator of Rapid Rupture here. And there's a lot of theoretical physics going on. It's quite interesting. His student, Robert Serber, writes a primer of building the bomb. A Los Alamos primer, it's published as, it's declassified, but it really tells you the physics of how to make a bomb. It was pretty clear what the physics were, though there were a lot of, if you will, gaps to be filled in. They didn't know that much about uranium, but they had the idea they could get a lot of energy out of a small amount of uranium here too. And then a lot of it really is going to become, if you will, the engineering side here. And with the problems, though, uranium, it had been known for, hundreds of years, used as a glaze. It's actually kind of orange. I have some uranium china in the house. Try not to eat off of it. And plutonium had just been discovered. It would turn out in 1940. And this is what's so amazing about it, because, a pinhead of it didn't exist until about 1942, 1943. It had to be made in nuclear reactors. The first nuclear reactor was made December 1942, Enrico Fermi. And then very quickly in the movie, you saw, here's a dish of marbles for a plutonium bomb. Here's a uranium bomb. Here's how much they're getting. And it was, incredibly hard to make, but you didn't need large amounts here. And again, it's all very, very new. There was one theoretical question hinted at the movie, was if you get a bomb to go off at its tremendous temperature, would it ignite the atmosphere? And the great Hans Bethe, who went to Cornell, I used to see him walk by for lunch every day, calculated that there was a non-zero chance, or a near zero chance. Not very big, but could happen. The Manhattan Project, you had a government committee, some high-ups, absolutely, Vannevar Bush, James Conant, if you know them, and they saw Oppenheimer as a leader of a lab, which is a little bit surprising because Oppenheimer never really led things. One of his colleagues said he couldn't even lead who wanted the job, I think, couldn't even run a hamburger stand here. Well, the project, at this point is very well funded. Ernest Lawrence had been trying to get money for cyclotrons. He could build whatever he wanted to. And General Leslie Groves, played by Matt Damon in the movie, becomes head of what's called the Manhattan Engineering District, which means nothing. In 1942, Groves he's known to the local area. Why? He built the Pentagon very, very quickly. And his next assignment, well-trained, again, sometimes he's played a little bit buffoonish in the movies, not in the recent one, but he went to MIT and West Point. Very smart man, and he wanted to get it done, and he wanted someone who could work well with the scientists, who understood the scientists. He is, even though the military is, some elements of the military are going to have a lot of qualms about Oppenheimer and his background, Groves overrules them. He said he is the man to get this done. He can explain to me, and he can work with people, and people have tremendous respect for him too in the field of physics. So anyway, Groves pushes to lead a laboratory. Groves doesn't like the separate spaces, the relatively open college campuses, and has the notion everybody should be in one place. Initially, they should be part of the Army. Oppenheimer fought that, but they would have, separate weapons labs, and there would be several. The weapons development would take place all over the United States. A lot of people didn't know what they were building, working on. That was part of the atomic bomb, but there would be some primary laboratories. Oak Ridge, Hanford would be two. We'll talk a little bit about them. And then Los Alamos. Oppenheimer knew it well, thought it was a good place to go. It was isolated. New Mexico is far away, wasn't going to be bombed from the coast. Submarines couldn't bother. And up on the mesas of Los Alamos, you could essentially put a fence and keep everybody together here. So Oppenheimer, again, you see this in the movie, goes out. Oppenheimer is incredibly well-known, incredibly charming, incredibly persuasive. And of course, there's a number of great projects going on. Radar would be a good example. Rocketry, not in the United States, but actually, curiously, in German. But Oppenheimer gets really, really fine physicists to come to Los Vegas, Los Alamos here. A little bit about fission we need to talk about. you remember the picture, look at this one, U-235. Remember your atom, your picture of your atom, you have a nucleus, and then you have the solar system model. You have electrons zipping around here. Well, uranium, an atom, an element is defined by the number of protons it has. So here, the red balls, if you will, and then it has some number of neutrons. And an atom, uranium, always will have 92 protons. It will have different number of neutrons. You add the two together, you get the atomic weight here. So you have uranium-235 if you have 143 neutrons. If you add 146, you get U-238, uranium-238 here. U-235 is relatively rare, and it's hard to separate out, but it turns out what you are going to do with an atom to get it to fission is you're going to send a neutron in. It can go past the electrons because it has no electrical charge, and it is going to break it in two. And you have these two pieces that fly apart with, it's most of the energy of nuclear fission is the electrostatic repulsion, like two poles of a magnet just sending these two pieces off together. And U-235 is what you want. And what you want it to happen is I need my next picture here. Yeah, you want a chain reaction here. Oops, I'm sorry. Let's see if I can get that back. Yeah. So chain reaction being the idea, a neutron is going to come in. It's going to split an atom. And it's going to split an atom, as you see here. So here's U-235. You have two pieces, fission fragments, basically other elements here. And then this one atom is going to split, give some energy. We'll talk about how much in a second. And neutrons are going to go flying off. Well, that neutron is going to hit another U-235, which is going to split, send off. It's going to split at least two atoms here, etc. So you have one turning to two, turning to four, turning to eight, very, very quickly giving off energy. Individual atom, well, it's enough energy. Somebody said to tickle a mosquito or raise a grain of sand off the ground. Doesn't seem like much until you realize there are billions of billions of billions, huge amounts of energy potentially coming out of a relatively small amount of uranium here. The challenge is here, as you're getting this to split, is if you think of this as here's a large group of match heads that could explode. You hold a match to a group of match heads and everything just kind of disintegrates. An explosion starts, but things, fly off. The challenge is going to be you want to keep, as everything is exploding, you want to keep things together. You either want a very quick explosion or you want a slower explosion where things are being held together. If you were, and this is something you'll see in fireworks, fireworks are going to have a wrapping on them. So the explosion goes through, all of the material. Otherwise, you're just blowing, a lot of things into the air. So keep that in mind. That's an important thing. So U-235, it's chemically, it's all uranium. It's harder to separate out. There's going to be different ways to do it. Nobody really knows what the right way is. They're essentially flying in the dark, making it up as they go along here. Plutonium is discovered here, and you need a nuclear reactor to make any significant quantity here. And it's made from uranium. Here, and it will have 94 protons as opposed to 92. And what plutonium is, it's actually great for making bombs. Virtually all the bombs now are made out of plutonium. Even the fission bombs, the fusion bombs have a smaller, if you will, fission bomb on the inside, atomic bomb that generates the heat and the pressure needed to get the larger bomb to go off here. And plutonium, if you want to make a bomb, seems to be like a nice thing to make because it is even more energetic than uranium when it splits. But the problem is it splits very, very easily. It's very, very active. You have to get it to explode very quickly, or really there's a struggle how to hold it together as an explosion begins. And that's going to be critical here. Plutonium barely exists, in 1942. And again, Fermi is going to make a reactor in 1943. Ultimately, there's two types of bombs. And the one that drops on Hiroshima here, you've got two pieces of U-235. And the idea is if you bring them together, if you have too big a piece, it can explode. But you bring a piece together, and if you can push on it, it will explode. And that's pretty easy to do in the scheme of things. And it's really, if you will, I don't mean this badly, an engineering problem. I don't know how well you can see this, but here you have essentially a cylinder of uranium hollow cylinder, and here you have a solid cylinder. And the notion is, I believe, basically you fire this off on this end, and this piece goes sliding along, unites with this. And if it comes in fast enough, and there'll be more pressure, it will explode fairly efficiently. It's not as efficient. Plutonium turns out is even more efficient. So it's very, very hard to make uranium-235. They make it. They didn't have a lot of it. They knew this sort of bomb was going to work, so they made it without a test. Plutonium was actually different, because it is so active. If you had that sort of gun that I just described here, what would happen? It would start to fission as the two pieces. You couldn't shoot it in fast enough. The whole thing would just explode. And you'd get a very weak explosion, as billions of dollars of plutonium just flew in. So they developed the so-called implosion design. And this was all done 1944, less than a year before the bomb was actually made. And this type of bomb was dropped on Nagasaki here. You have the center core of plutonium, which amazingly enough is not much bigger than an orange. The uranium bomb is not much bigger than a grapefruit here, but the amount that you need. So you're talking like 10, 20 pounds of a dense metal here. But the idea of the bomb here is you have this piece here, and you have a lot of explosives around it, and they are very carefully timed. So they will explode, and a pressure wave will come in from all sides, and that will take the plutonium metal, and it will crush it. And these shock waves they have to be done very well, going to be pressing into it as it's exploding, holding it so you get a good amount of explosion. If you don't, if this isn't symmetric, if you have like more press on this side, then you just get a splurt of liquid plutonium metal under the side. So this was a very difficult, very new technology, had a lot of difficult mathematics. John von Neumann gets involved here. But basically the idea is take an orange, turn it into a golf ball, a lot of explosives around it. These days, shortly after the war, these bombs were made very, very small. You could put them in a backpack here. So basically the bomb Los Alamos is developed out of nothing, beginning in March 1943, Oppenheimer being the scientific director here. It starts out small, gets bigger, but it's here in Los Alamos, which you can now visit. I don't know how long it's been open to the public. It's now a national park. I've been there. Still a lot of bomb work. There's different parts of Los Alamos. You can go to the older part of Los Alamos, see Oppenheimer's house, some of the buildings, and some of the buildings were actually used in the filming of the movies. So just want to go to the next one. So that was Los Alamos and a couple of the other big plants. And again, these are made, this is, the genius of General Groves, who again built the Pentagon. They are building, let's see, I have to know which is here. This is down in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. They needed immense amount of power to separate out uranium-235 from 238. And they built the city of Oak Ridge. It's still there. Of course, you had the TVA dams down there. And this is Hanford, now a major nuclear waste site, where they built reactors to brew up plutonium here. And again, a new element, and they needed, to making that amount of plutonium took, huge amounts of money. The whole Manhattan Project cost about $2 billion. So I don't know what that would come up to. So anyway, Los Alamos opens March and 43. Oppenheimer, very, very busy, but he's everywhere, talking with everybody, involved in every theoretical problem, every practical problem. And the town grows very quickly. It's very ramshackle, a little bit like the Pentagon wasn't supposed to be a permanent building here. But Oppenheimer wanted to be civilian status because he said, scientists have to be able to talk. General Groves didn't like that. Ultimately, spies got into the mix. They actually came in through the British contingent here. So people work, it's exhausting work 6 days a week. And people are motivated by the fact they think Germany is building a bomb. They have superb engineering. They have some superb scientists. One Hitler's gift, as it were, was so many scientists to the project. So many scientists had left Europe and they found their way in the United States. They were very happy to work on war work and the Manhattan Project. And they were just motivated to work night and day on this. Oppenheimer has a daughter. He's married, it turned out, to Kitty, played by Emily Blunt in the movie. And Emily had been a communist, had given up before she met Robert Oppenheimer. He's questioned a number of times. His phone is tapped, etc. But Groves, has said, keep him in, but he's still being watched. And, famously, you'll see this in the movie, he is questioned about the meeting he had with Hagen Chevalier, where, he lied. That comes out more later. More information comes out. So anyway, he tells a false tale, what he will call a cock and bull story. Well, Trinity named after the poetry of John Donne, Oppenheimer gave the name, and they realized that the gun bomb wasn't going to work. They needed to try the plutonium bomb. Here's another picture here with von Neumann. You can see the explosion coming in, bringing various materials together, but then ultimately bringing pressure on this ball of plutonium that is going to be crushed and explode while held in place by this outside explosion. So a lot of computation going on. Here's Robert Oppenheimer with a young man, Richard Feynman, who would go on to great things. His wife, interestingly enough, was dying from tuberculosis at a sanitarium very, very close by. A lot of, one thing kind of jumping ahead, after the war, a lot of scientists didn't really want to do atomic bomb work. They had done it, they wanted to get away from it. And some people said, is that their feeling towards nuclear weapons? It was for many, for some, partially, certainly, but a lot of them, they were young people. They wanted to go back to the universities to develop their careers. Feynman, if I remember, some of them even didn't have their PhD. I think he had just gotten his here. Well, late in 1944, Germany is collapsing. Allied troops are going in, and they realize the Germans didn't get anywhere on a bomb. That's a story unto itself here. And the question is, do we need to make this bomb? There was no chance, no thought to Japanese. They did a little nuclear work. Everybody knew you could make a bomb, but they just didn't have the resources to work. And some people are having qualms about it here, but realize it could be potentially used against the Japanese. And what's happening to Japan at this point, Japan is in the process of being annihilated. You have fire bombings going on in Tokyo or in Japan, killing 100,000 people a night. You had Dresden too. But Japan was being destroyed. The Allies were getting closer and closer. And eventually some people are going to say, once they see the atomic bomb between the test and the time, do we need it? Is the war over? And that's going to be an issue. Yeah. So the atomic bomb gets wrapped up in politics, not surprising here, in that the target, maybe a bad choice of words here, but what the pressure is from the military, from Washington, from inside the Manhattan Project, is to test this bomb So when Truman goes to Potsdam, at this point, Roosevelt had died. Truman didn't even know about the bomb. That Truman would know, does he have a weapon that could potentially end the war and keep the Russians out of the war? Since absent the bomb, it's very likely the Yalta agreements, the Soviets would have had a bigger play in the Pacific theater. As it is, they got in just as the war was ending here. So the Trinity test, it's 19 kilotons. By the standards of bombs today, it's relatively small, but this plutonium bomb made out of a metal, which people didn't really know about, which was produced in quantity just in the few years, that whole technology. This, unusual, difficult, the test didn't work very well, but they made it work. The bomb went off 19 kilotons. That's 20,000 tons of TNT. And some of the explosions that existed before, I think you see it in the movie, a ship had exploded in Halifax Harbor with 5,000 tons of TNT. I mean, it was needless to say, a huge explosion, but you ain't seen nothing yet compared to the bombs that are there. Here's a little test footage from the Trinity site. I thought the movie did a very good job of recreating the look of Los Alamos, including this bomb, which was called the Gadget. It wasn't meant to be a bomb, but it went into essentially a bomb case when it went over Nagasaki, something similar to this. You'll see a little bit of Oppenheimer pork pie hat as the bomb is being assembled. And there's no sound here. Here's Oppenheimer. I want to show you a little more of this. Oppenheimer again. Yeah, and it turned out, per the movie, the bomb was exploded 5:30 in the morning, and tremendous storms the night before. There was some poor soldier who had to sit next to it, lightning all around him during the time. So here it is, the Gadget, and the Gadget being raised to the top of a tower, which would be vaporized in the explosion. Up it goes. And again, looking like what you saw in the movie, to the top of a tower, and then, of course, 5:30 in the morning after the rainstorm. So, very successful test. Oppenheimer and General Groves here at the bomb site. You can see what's left of the tower here, wearing the little booties here. I'm not sure people understood radiation. Oppenheimer during the war, he'd been worn down. It was never a heavy man, over 6 feet tall, 130 pounds, went down to 115. Chain smoker, more than ever during the war. General Groves, a heavier man for sure, kept Hershey bars in his office safe. Oppenheimer's thoughts after the war. This is famous. Remember, he loved the Hindu scriptures.
He knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another. The world would not be the same.
Death, destroyer of world. So before Hiroshima, there was a question, do we need this weapon? If we let this weapon out, what's going to happen next? And, good questions. They ultimately become very important questions. And, there were people who argued, and Oppenheimer was sympathetic to them, that Some would say that the bomb would contribute to long-term peace. I'll spell that correctly next time. Or potentially, the United States wouldn't be the only country to have it. Other countries could develop it. It was not that difficult an engineering problem. The science was pretty well known here. And Oppenheimer was part of a committee. There was some discussion, maybe we should test the bomb for the Japanese, invite them to a test. But the notion was, what if it didn't work? And then others said, well, suppose the invasion of Japan goes ahead. No, Japan may have been beaten, but they were going to put up a heck of a fight. And the estimates were just horrific, that there would be several 100,000 Allied casualties trying to invade the islands. Japanese putting up fierce defense, and the Japanese would have fought, tooth and nail to the end, with hundreds of thousands, if not more, casualties, civilians included here. And, some would say that if we go down that path, or we have an invasion of Japan, and then people find out we had a weapon that could potentially have ended the war and we chose not to use it, that would be a problem, explaining that to folks. So really, people wanted just to end the war as quickly as possible. It's a terrible war. People were tired of it, and the prospect looked, pretty awful here. So the war, it was seen as a way to end the war. And Oppenheimer, even at that point, after the Trinity test, he said, this is not that effective a weapon because it's so terrible, you almost can't use it. And you can only imagine what happens when these bombs get bigger and bigger. And he had the belief after the war, others did, maybe naive, that somehow you could control the power of the bomb. You could limit it. Ultimately, there would be arms control treaties, but those really didn't come into play until the 1970s. We had tens of thousands of warheads and some huge city-busting warheads. Oppenheimer would not have been happy about that, though he didn't talk about nuclear weapons after the 1950s. So I'm going to skip over this here. Basically, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, we know the story. Here is Hiroshima. It was actually a relatively small bomb, I think 13, 14 kilotons, about 13,000 tons of TNT wiped out, 10 square miles of the city, left us with, terrible pictures, caused problems, health problems afterwards, cancers, etc. Here's what Hiroshima looked like at the time of the bombing. There was a building built in 1914, I think, that is now a memorial to Hiroshima. Very good museum there. I've visited it. After the war, Oppenheimer, the war ended. People were thrilled. And, it was amazing that we had this ability. We had these people who could build this incredible bomb that brought the war to an end, that might have gone on at terrific cost here. Scientists leave Los Alamos here. Oppenheimer, again, the UN was there. He was thinking maybe the UN could take control. Again, a lot of contentious politics here. And he's hoping that the bomb is going to be so terrible that war will be impossible. My reaction to that, I think George Bernard Shaw looked at that too. Every new weapon is more terrible than, that becomes more terrible than the last. The machine gun gets used and gets spread, and then something, more destructive comes across here. There was talk of building a hydrogen bomb. Edward Teller had been pushing this from word go even before the atomic bomb was built. And Oppenheimer basically argued that the fission bombs are destructive enough, that, you can take out military bases. We would call these tactical nuclear weapons. It's pretty much what most of our nuclear forces are now, smaller bombs than the ones Teller was building. Part of the reason he wanted to build these, when you have these enormous bombs, hundreds, thousands of times more bigger than Hiroshima, they certainly take out an area. The notion was, well, if you had a good air defense, let's say we're going after the Russians, and they shoot down planes, we're not going to be able to get to the targets. Well, if you have a bomb that, knocks out everything 20, 30 miles in a circle, you don't have to get that close. Of course, you put the bombs on missiles and you can bring them, these days, you can bring them down within 10 feet of where you want them. So those, there's a lot of discussion. Oppenheimer is the head of a number of committees, the General Advisory Committee. He's appointed by President Truman. Again, he's the source of nuclear wisdom, part because he knows everybody, I think partly because people respect him. But the military wants bigger and bigger bombs. Oppenheimer doesn't. And he's seen as being against building the hydrogen bomb. Something that isn't mentioned at the time is Oppenheimer argued, and he couldn't argue this openly, and we really discovered the strength of his argument only in recent years, and we'll see why, like the last couple of years. He argued that if we build a hydrogen bomb, it wasn't clear one could be built, and there were a lot of problems that really didn't get worked out. It seemed like it couldn't be built, actually, for a time. But Oppenheimer argued, as you are building, working, doing the work on a hydrogen bomb, you are taking the resources, the uranium, the reactor capacity needed to build fission bombs. And we would be better off having, several hundred fission bombs that we could drop on individual targets, maybe having backup of them, than not being able to build those bombs while we're putting those resources into developing a bomb that may or may not work. And even if it did, militarily would not be that much more effective than several placed fission bombs. So here's Oppenheimer after the war in 1947, probably not saying what the military wanted to hear, and maybe not what the population wanted to hear.
I have been asked whether in the years to come it will be possible to kill 40 million American people in the 20 largest American towns by the use of atomic bombs in a single night. I am afraid that the answer to that question is yes.
That 40 million in 20 cities, that's at a time when the population is about 100 million. So Oppenheimer and Truman, Oppenheimer leaves Los Alamos. He has all these advisory roles. His security is checked again, and basically no new information, but he's, partly because of what he's done, he's takes these very high positions here. And so he will meet with Truman in 1945, and he says, I have blood on my hands. And he wanted to urge upon Truman the idea, we have to control this weapon. We have to limit it. The Soviets, could get it tomorrow. Truman thought no. And when Oppenheimer said, I have blood on my hands, Truman pulled out his handkerchief and then realized what Oppenheimer was talking about. You saw this in the movie. Truman had a lot more blood on his hands, and he called Oppenheimer crybaby and thought the Soviets could never get the bomb. Well, he does appoint Oppenheimer, again, given Oppenheimer's prestige, the head of an advisory committee. Oppenheimer gets his clearance, and Oppenheimer will say, physicists have known sin. So he becomes, he's not going to stay with the bomb. He doesn't go back to Berkeley. He's got a lot of work going to Washington for these various advisory committees, et cetera. And he's invited to become director for advanced study, Einstein's boss, if you will. The two did know each other. And Oppenheimer, again, the public face of science, of nuclear weapons certainly, is on the cover of Time magazine here. And one of the trustees of the Institute of Advanced Study is a man named Lewis Strauss, who plays big time in the movie, who will become an Atomic Energy Committee. And Strauss has very different politics from an Oppenheimer. The two are going to clash. And I think Oppenheimer does a potentially stupid thing here. Strauss is a man with great vanity, played brilliantly by Robert Downey Jr. in the movie. And there's a discussion, should we send radioisotopes off to the Norwegians, of all people? And these, if you've had a medical procedure, you probably have had experience with some of these radioisotopes injected into your veins, and things can be followed, etc. And Strauss says no. And Oppenheimer said, well, maybe they're of military value. That's his question. But so is a bottle of beer, or a whole, or a shovel. A shovel is worth more than a bottle of beer, but not worth much more than these radioisotopes. Strauss was sitting there, apparently bright red, and never forgot the day. You see a little of that movie. 1950s, well, the Soviets have an A-bomb, and they're still back and forth. Should we build this weapon? Should we build this weapon? And this is the time, the McCarthy era concern, so Cold War has started here. And, if you had communism in your background, certainly in Hollywood, certainly in the arts, certainly in science, your career could be ruined. Brother Frank's teaching career, he ended up working on a ranch for a few years. His ranch sold one of the Van Gogh family Van Goghs, to have some money. Eventually got a job teaching high school here. And Oppenheimer gets questioned by the House Un-American committees. They have an executive session. They look at everything on Oppenheimer, including the record that they had with Chevalier and such, and they cleared him. They didn't follow, and actually Congressman Richard Nixon shook his hand and thanked him very much for what he did. Oppenheimer has a lot of enemies, though, particularly in the military. Strauss is no great friend of his. Here, Strauss is going to become chairman of the Atomic Energy Committee here, and Oppenheimer, doesn't really want to build the atomic bomb, and he's not doing much to get other people to work on it here, and people listening to his arguments, scientists who might work on it here, etc. And he claimed it was a drain on A-bomb resources. And again, good argument. This all leads up to the hearing. So Strauss, chairman of the AEC, Oppenheimer at this point basically has gotten out of a lot of his consulting work. He still has a contract. He's not doing any work, though, here, and his clearance is going to expire in the middle of 1954. Keep that in mind. Well, Strauss wants Oppenheimer removed from policy, and he suspends Oppenheimer. He convinces Eisenhower, suspend his security clearance, even though it has 6 months to go, and Oppenheimer isn't doing any work. He doesn't have any, whatever is in his head is in his head. But Eisenhower agrees to that. And basically, Strauss wanted Oppenheimer to resign from any sort of consultancies, to have nothing here. And, Oppenheimer is given a chance for a hearing, and he said, I can't, resign. That would be acknowledging. And, people said, essentially, you're disloyal to the United States. And, people are looking at this and say, look at what this man did. And there's actually a claim with no evidence that he's a Soviet agent at the time. So the hearing, and what my surprise in the movie was, from the preview, I didn't really realize how much was going to focus on the hearing. I think many of you have seen the movie. It's, the early years of Oppenheimer. The center of the movie, if you will, is the Los Alamos experience, which I thought was done brilliantly. And then you get the counterpart, and you'll see it throughout the movie, but between Strauss and Oppenheimer, and the focus after Oppenheimer loses his clearance, Strauss is nominated to be Commerce Secretary, and he essentially, what he did to Oppenheimer, what happened to Oppenheimer really affected Strauss's chances of being the hearing and being confirmed. He wasn't. So there's a 3-panel hearing, member hearing. It's not a court case, remember that. And the panel is chosen by Strauss, who he essentially chooses people who are not going to be favorable to Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer is questioned. It's a little 3-4 weeks, 27 hours by a prosecutor, Roger Robb. And Oppenheimer, during this, he is being wiretapped. His lawyers are being wiretapped. He doesn't get to see the evidence that's going to be presented against him. Robb, the former prosecutor, is given a security clearance. Oppenheimer's without a problem. Oppenheimer's attorneys aren't here. So Groves, a number of people come in. All the scientists, virtually all of the scientists, come in and vouch for Oppenheimer. They, say he did an unbelievable job. He's absolutely loyal to the country. General Groves comes in and very reluctantly says, I would not appoint Oppenheimer given the current regulations, that they had. But he said, I admire Oppenheimer. I saw security. I saw no problem at the time here. So there really weren't a lot of negative witnesses against Oppenheimer, but the deck was stacked against him. One person who came in was Edward Teller, who had very mixed feelings towards Oppenheimer, in part because Teller wanted to have a bigger role in Los Alamos. He wanted to work on the hydrogen bomb. Oppenheimer allowed him to do that during the war, Oppenheimer's feeling was Teller's time would have been better spent on developing the A-bomb. But then, Oppenheimer was against developing the H-bomb, which Teller thought needed to be developed. So he comes in and gives testimony. It's very mixed testimony. The board votes 2-1 to deny clearance. It's upheld 4-1 by the larger commission led by Louis Strauss. They race to get their opinion together because Oppenheimer loses his clearance with 1 day to spare. His contract would have ended up. But I think the example was Oppenheimer was to be an example. You need to go along with the government and the AEC. Here, it kind of had the opposite effect among the scientists. They said, this is terrible. We can't speak our minds, our voices. We want even less to do with some of these projects. As it is, many people did come in. And there was the argument was almost moot, I think, at Oppenheimer's hearing about building the hydrogen bomb. He did go along with it here when it was clear it would actually work. And that was an issue. And when Oppenheimer lost his clearance, the largest bomb ever detonated by the United States was a hydrogen bomb, which was used in the first test. It was so powerful that 15 megatons, 15 million tons of TNT, it was almost fearsome that it had to be ratcheted back. Though eventually in some tests there would be larger bombs, some underground, the Soviets would explode one even bigger than that, thousands of times bigger than the Hiroshima bomb. So Oppenheimer loses his clearance. I'm watching time here. Edward Teller, there was a good scene. You'll see some of this in the movie here, but there's a good documentary. Sam Waterston is Oppenheimer TV series. Oppenheimer losing his clearance, was known. Strauss had wanted to keep it quiet, but it had gotten out to the press, the hearings and such. Oppenheimer, after the war, goes back to Princeton, he's shut out from atomic weapon policy, wants nothing to do with it, and he doesn't discuss it. His loyalty never disproven. Strauss is, as you know from the movie, voted down as Commerce Secretary, largely because people thought he was duplicitous when it came to dealing with Oppenheimer here. Teller ostracized by many, but he does go on leading H development. He's certainly a proponent, and he has a career in the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars, under Reagan. Will live another almost 50 years. The H-bomb work, and this is important to consider, it's going to continue. There's an arms race. We have tens of thousands. The United States has tens of thousands of weapons. The Soviets have tens of thousands of weapons. In the 1960s, very large ones are a mix here, but we have arms control treaties, so I'm not sure they're binding at this point, and the number of weapons are reduced, and we tend to move to smaller weapons, less of these mammoth weapons, more tactical, weapons you could potentially use in a battlefield setting. The Russians have mentioned them in the context of the Ukraine war here. Oppenheimer was a voice of moderation at the time, and that voice, I think, was lost in the 1950s as weapons, were developed, and maybe could have done better to have had it, in my opinion. He does win an award in 1963, the Fermi Award. Oppenheimer at this point is 60, and he's not a good-looking 60. He hasn't aged well, 5 packs of cigarettes a day, not surprisingly going to catch up with him. He's given this award, and he says to President Johnson, I'm sure it took a certain amount of courage for you to give me this award, given there's controversy over Oppenheimer. At the award ceremony, you see Edward Teller came up to him. This is Glenn Seberg. Mrs. Oppenheimer looks none too happy. You saw that scene well done in the movie, I thought. Here is Teller, who some would consider to be the model of Dr. Strangelove. Don't fence my baby in, when there are various nuclear test bans and arms control treaties argued. Oppenheimer, the end. He continues at Princeton until 1965. He's diagnosed, perhaps not surprisingly, with throat cancer, affects his ability to speak, his hearing. He does get an honorary degree from Princeton in June. And you can see, here he is, 63 years old, not looking good. And he has some recovery, but his health fails. and he dies age 62, 1967. His wife takes the ashes down to Virgin Islands. They had gone down there. Oppenheimer, as you remember, loved sailing. He had a daughter with polio, his daughter with polio. They went down there so she could swim in the warm waters and such. And they had a beach home since the 1950s. He bought it shortly after the hearing. Well, interestingly enough, the cottage got blown away in a hurricane, but they still call it the Oppenheimer Beach here. Family aftermath, Kitty Oppenheimer, she had a lot of trouble with alcohol, dies 5 years later. The daughter commits suicide. She's down in the Virgin Islands. She's refused a security clearance. The FBI still has certain grudges against the Oppenheimer family. The son, Peter, lives down in Los Alamos at the house that the fathers, that the Oppenheimers had, not too far from Los Angeles. I believe he's still alive. And he works as a carpenter. He never, capitalizes. It really builds on the Oppenheimer name here. Brother Frank, I mentioned, goes back to teaching. He goes on, interestingly enough, he gets a university job in 1959. He goes on to found the Exploratorium out in San Francisco, just great science museum here. Oppenheimer in the news. Well, in 2014, some of the material that the hearing did not publish, and we have a transcript. That's how we could get that teller scene. And we know pretty much what happened in the hearing. But there was material that was declassified, and it was favorable to Oppenheimer. And what happened in December 2022, last year, the Department of Energy essentially vacated the AEC decision. Oppenheimer, in theory, could get his clearance back if he were alive today. In 1954, the Atomic Energy Commission revoked Dr. Oppenheimer's security clearance through a flawed process that violated the commission's own regulations. As time has passed, more evidence has come to light of the bias and unfairness of the process that Oppenheimer was subjected to, while the evidence of his loyalty and love of country have only been further affirmed. A lot of the information that was not shown, and maybe it was out of security concerns, was that building the atomic bomb really did slow down building a number of fission weapons, smaller weapons, using them as tactical weapons to build those mega bombs here. Some books, lots of books are available on Oppenheimer. Just got to mention, well, all of them, but American Prometheus is the book that Christopher Nolan read, which is really the basis. It's 600-700 pages on Oppenheimer, a lot of detail. Wonderful book on atomic bomb history, Richard Rhodes. It's really one of 4 books. There's a next one on the hydrogen bomb, a couple books on things. I had mentioned Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, 1980 series. Then there's another film, which I believe you can find on YouTube, The Trials of Robert Oppenheimer. His biography interspersed with the hearing. There's a wonderful movie, The Day After Trinity. You can see here. This Christopher Nolan movie is no longer new. What did Nolan have to say about Oppenheimer? I'm drawn to interesting protagonists who have ambiguity to them. I think of any character I've dealt with, Oppenheimer is by far the most ambiguous and paradoxical, which, given that I've made 3 Batman films, is saying a lot. So the movie, here it is. It's available on DVD now. I don't know if it's on streaming services. Good biography of Oppenheimer on the DVD here. Of course, it came out with Barbie during the day, so you could watch 2. You can guess which movie I preferred here. So some of the cast, you had Cillian Murphy, played a superb Oppenheimer, Emily Blunt, Matt Damon, Robert Downey Jr. I did not realize he was going to have this role, but I thought it was superb. Gary Oldman played Harry Truman. You had Kenneth Branagh, Niels Bohr. Rami Malek, who is a very ambiguous small part, but then it turns out that he becomes a scientist who testified against Strauss in this confirmation hearing. So I need to update this slide. It actually was supposed to come out after Christmas, the DVD. It came out earlier. I'm going to skip over the movie preview. We've seen that. Questions and comments. What I'd like to do, I don't know if we have a lot of comments here, but I'd like to just show you something. And let's just see if we can get to this. Just want to depress you all. And here's Washington, D.C. And if we wanted to drop a Hiroshima-sized bomb on Washington, D.C., what we would see is there would be an explosion, and then coming out to here basically all buildings would be destroyed. So think of going, from Georgetown to the Capitol and a bit beyond. Life wouldn't be pleasant here. Windows would be blown out, etc. And just take you to the sort of bomb that's on the Minuteman. I'm going to take actually a megaton bomb, which we were used here. Now you see how much further the destruction of buildings are, the radiation damage, and just windows being blown out of buildings. These bombs are immensely powerful. And as I said, I think Nolan did the movie in part thinking that people thought these bombs, the problem wasn't there. So I'm going to stop with that. Did I lose you? Yep, there we go. Sorry. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Sorry, I'm having trouble here.
You stop sharing.
Oh, okay. So I thought I did. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just getting a lot of phone. All right. Let me take a look at Q&A and do what we need to. Actually, should I answer the Q&A? They're actually pretty quick.
Yeah, you sure? Sure.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. What percentage of the mass of U-235 is converted to energy? Interestingly enough, most of the power of the atomic bomb is not the E equals mc squared. It's the fact that you've taken the atom, you have two positively charged elements that go flying apart. That's 2/3 of the energy. The amount of energy is small. It's like 0.1%. Basically, and again, it's the kinetic energy. You have some mass to energy, and then you have the radiation, the heat. It's amazing, how much energy you get from that. So the plutonium bomb has more. The fusion bomb works a different way. Putting things together is like 10 times more effective, and of course, it's much lighter. So, the problem is with a fission bomb, you have a limit on how big you can make it. With a hydrogen bomb, there's essentially no limit. You use the atomic bomb as a fuse, if you will, to get the heat and pressure, and you can just keep, loading its lithium actually around it and get as big an explosion as you want. The Soviets had a 50 megaton bomb. If you set that off over Washington, you would destroy everything between Gaithersburg and Fredericksburg, basically here. There's a question, was there a way to use a smaller amount of explosive in the bombs dropped on Japan to demonstrate the capabilities to cause less destruction? I'm not sure if, the Hiroshima bomb was pretty small by the standpoint of atomic bombs. The notion was you might take them out to an island or explode it over Tokyo harbor. What's interesting is the city of Hiroshima, there were Nagasaki, and there were several other cities that were preserved for potential atomic bombing because everything in Japan had been destroyed. People mentioned drop it on Tokyo, and they said there's nothing left there to destroy. One city that was considered for atomic bombing was Kyoto. The Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, very older man at that point, had honeymooned there, and he knew that was the cultural heartland. It also had some military capability of Japan, and said, please, he didn't have to say, he ordered it not to be bombed, and the military kept coming back with, we'd like to bomb it. It would have a good effect on the Japanese here. I spoke with somebody from Japan who said, if you'd bombed Kyoto, we might have fought longer. It's just such an important city to us. Was there a way, so did Groves know Oppenheimer before he recommended him for the Manhattan Project? The answer is no. He knew him as part of the Manhattan Project. He read the security file, and he met him, and he just felt Oppenheimer was the right man. Somebody saw the play, some of 1969. They saw a play, Matter of J. Robin Oppenheimer. Didn't know much, but left with the feeling he was being railroaded. Am I familiar with it? It was written off the transcript. Oppenheimer didn't like it. I think he wanted to fade from the scene from there too. There's a book. I preferred the book American Prometheus. This is Steve Shapiro, which was co-authored by Daughter's college advisor. It's a very good book. There's another one by Ray Monks. I would say both of them, give you a lot of information on Oppenheimer. There's plenty of, good books out there. It's interesting, a key vote that flipped the Senate against Strauss was cast by a relatively new Senator, John F. Kennedy. And did Heisenberg intentionally hinder development of the German bomb? He would say so. We don't really know. It's a great ambiguity, much discussed and dramatized too. And then was the reason for the security clearance due to its association with communists, since no verification of them being communists? Not sure I understand the question here. A security clearance at the end, there really hadn't been anything new against him. And, you see that in the movie. Strauss said, "Oh, I've read your clearance." Groves had read it, others had read it, et cetera. Oppenheimer did show bad character. He wasn't truthful, at the time. He made up a cock and bull story, as he said, because he was an idiot. But there really wasn't that much new in the claim that he was a Soviet agent put together by William Borden. There's an interesting story to that. Again, the best thing about all this, you can read more about it. And I think that covers the Q&A.
Good. I will chime in then, Dan. Thank you for an interesting presentation. Not a surprise. It was extremely interesting and extremely complete and well done. So thank you very much. So this is Dan's swan song to Encore Learning. And most of us know Dan from many courses that he's taught here, everything from musical composition to specific composers, to films, to specific subjects. Their high point in terms of attendance was Hamilton, the Man in the Musical, which we played twice. And here's a little list of things that Dan has done. And it's really with sadness, Dan, that we acknowledge that you'd like to move on to other things. So we recognize that, but we will sure miss you, Dan. And if you have any burning desire to have an audience for a specific subject, we're here and we're ready.
Well, maybe I'll take one out of my sleeve. Never, as Sean Connery said, never say never.
Okay, well, you know where we live, and we would love to have you back. And again, a really sincere thank you for enlightening us and entertaining us, and really being a part of this group for so long. Truly, we appreciate it.
I want to leave on a highlight. I don't know if the prospect of the nuclear weapons out there is what my memory should be, but certainly an issue. Now, I've covered a lot of good stuff. I love this stuff. I'm interested in it, and I hope, I like to say my talks are, I hope, informative and entertaining both. So I hope
they certainly are, truly, and varied, truly varied. You have many interests, and thanks for sharing them with us. And I see all these hearts and thumbs up going up on the screen, so I think that's positive. So I think many agree with me and with us on this. So
I hope everybody's gotten their money's worth. So
it's been great, Dan. So thank you very much. Okay, and I think that's a wrap, everybody.
It's a wrap. Watch the movie if you haven't seen it. It is good.
Okay, and don't forget to fill out the survey, please, everybody. We appreciate that, and we'll see you next week for Robert E. Lee and me, a wonderful book that the author will be talking to us about. Okay, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Encore Learning in particular. Bye-bye.